All right. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got a few more trickling in for sure. Really excited to show y'all everything that we've been up to. Josh and I were talking before this and looked at the last live stream that we did, and man, there was not a whole lot in this tool when we did it last. So really excited about this. If we haven't met, my name is Matt Harriman, founder, CEO of Pod2. Pod2 is an upstream planning, software, and consulting company. We've got some side projects and things like that, but the planner is the main focus that we're going to be talking about today. Josh and I, we met back in 2013. Back when Intersight was a startup. That's where we got together, and several other folks here at Pod2 got together and really grew up through that company as it evolved and became a much larger company that spanned the breadth of planning processes, kind of the whole vertical from portfolio all the way down to execution, everything in between. But this field development planning space has always been, probably the core focus of what we're about. So prior to Intersight, I worked for an operator, Chesapeake Energy, up in Oklahoma City, doing field development planning. And then when we started Pod2 in 2019, we've been focused on planning, process improvement consulting. And, the last few years, we've been building out the software business since Josh joined as our CTO. Josh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Josh Groves. I'm the CTO of Pod2. Background, like Matt said, I worked at Intersight back in 2013. Before that, I was with a couple operators, so really familiar with this whole scheduling and planning ecosystem. I've worked on all sides and did consulting roles, eventually turning into more of a developer role and leading software teams. And so when I joined Matt at Pod2, this was always something that we were really interested in. Matt started from the consulting side, and then when I joined, we started the Pod2 planner, and that's really the origin story of the planner.
Yeah. So we'll spare you too much PowerPointing and history and all this stuff, and we'll dive into the tool here in just a minute. But I think, Josh, didn't you say that there were 27 releases of the planner since the last time we did a live stream?
Yeah, exactly. So I went back to look at the last live demo we did, and so this is back in February of 2023. Since then, I actually had to go and count them all because there's been so many, but there's been 27 releases. And you can probably see, just looking at this screenshot, we didn't have metrics. So if you've seen any videos or screenshots of the planner over the past year, definitely the bottom section here is filled out quite a bit. And so that's something that we'll get into. But the tool has really evolved. So we started with just the scheduling that you saw in the last live demo, if you were there. If not, we'll go through the full tool, give you an introduction to it, but also talk about everything that's changed since this last one.
Yeah, and we started, based on the prioritization of, all the companies that we talked to, and so being able to do really good scheduling was kind of the first piece that companies were really struggling with, and then of course, the workflow of field development planning, and operational scheduling, it's not really complete until you get, production and capital and a lot of that other stuff. And so, of course, we're building it out. We've got a lot more on the roadmap and plans. We're releasing, pretty significant stuff about every 6 weeks. And I think especially over the next year, you're going to see, kind of the workflows being pretty well rounded out, and then us starting to dive into some really exciting stuff that's going to push this space forward. Because I think that it's been a long time since there's really been innovation in the planning technology space. There's several other companies that really excited about doing good stuff out there. Wellworth is one on the kind of corporate and financial planning side. But there's a bunch. And I think the thing that we're seeing that's common across them is, using modern technology is one. So everything should be faster, better. And then including, a lot of the features that we've had in other tools before. That's kind of a given. But the tools and technology has to fit people's workflows better. They have to be easier to use. They should not be super expensive and difficult to implement. And they should be really well integrated. So, we've committed to never being the bottleneck on data. And that's something that we're going to stick to. You'll see today some integrations that we've built out, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I don't know what kind of preview you might want to give, Josh, and just kind of mention some of the new stuff that people will see, and then I think we can dive into the demo from there.
For sure. So kind of at a high level. So like I mentioned, there's been 27 releases. So obviously we've been very busy. And so starting with scheduling, that was the most critical part of the workflow that we wanted to cover with the planner in the early days. Since then, I'll go through the release notes and kind of like the rough order that we released it. So we had we had a lot of major releases since then, but we started with things like exporting to Excel. You can see that, and that goes bidirectionally too. So being able to import and export from Excel, you saw ownership there. So we've added capital forecasting, production forecasting, which was obviously a major piece that people wanted to see as part of their plans. Being able to view activities by groups. You can see this combo curve integration in here. Activities being grouped into pad, DSU, area, all kinds of customization around scheduling functionality. We have Entersight integration. So the people that want to use Entersight as more of a calculator and being able to drive all of their iterations from the planner and then export to Entersight monthly for their one or two runs a month. We added a planning mode. So we always had a scheduling mode, which is or scheduling interaction mode, which was about layering on actuals or dates that are set in stone. You layer those on. Planning mode is about prioritization, and I'll get into that a little bit. But this has been a pretty big game changer for operators. Production forecast scaling. So more integration improvements. There's all kinds of stuff here, as you can see. Lookup tables, and that was also that release aligned with a formula editor, so you can write these more complicated formulas. So if you want to scale production based on lateral length, or if you want to use like a duration that's calculated based on lookups, you can do all of that. Just going down through, like I said, there's been a lot of releases. So we have SIMOPS restrictions, so we can automatically schedule around certain restrictions or constraints that you have based on well coordinates. So that's there now. Production limits, so compressor stations or takeaway limits. You can put all of that into the planner now, and it'll automatically curtail your production based on those limits. Revenue. So after CapEx and production, everybody was saying, well, I want to know how it impacts my revenue too. So that's in there now. All kinds of different export options. So we keep adding more and more integrations. BOE. Similar to SIMOPS, we have offset activity interference or frac interference, shut-ins due to frac, whatever you want to call it. So we have this ability to automatically shut in wells based on nearby activities. And base production, so you can put all your PDP wells in there and see how they're affected by interference as well. Gas shrinkage. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in here. So there's no way you can read all that. I'm just skimming through it really quick. Those were kind of like the high level themes that we've covered. Obviously within those, there are all kinds of different details, and unless we made this live stream 10 hours long, then we were just not going to go through it. I'll try to cover a bunch of those as we go through our demo of the planner and just talk about some of the major areas during the demo.
Yeah, and kind of a quick update on the business side of things. So early on, when we released it into early access at the beginning of 23, our goal for that was to get 3 companies up and running and operational, paying customers in order to get to full release, and we did that pretty quickly. So like summer of last year. So it was only about 7 or 8 months that it took to do that. Really, really grateful for those companies that, weren't afraid to try out a new technology, gave us, worked with us, gave us tons and tons of feedback, really battle tested this thing. So specifically Birchcliff and Grayson Mill, like massive shout outs to the folks there. It was really, really great and helping us kind of really get this stuff in use, because that's the way it's really going to improve. We can always iterate and get feedback and test things, but until it's being used for planning, scenario analysis at deadlines and stuff like that, that's when we really find out how to make it better. So really grateful for that. We've got about a dozen customers now, which is really exciting. The levels of complexity that we can handle are obviously a lot higher, 27 releases later. And, the size of company that, is putting this stuff to use is much, much higher than they were before. So we've got a good mix of, large, small companies, a couple of offshore players, Canada and the US, and some South America getting going as well. So it's really expanding, really grateful. The trajectory of this thing is awesome. I've been saying that, it's in the process of taking off. It hasn't, completely, but, I think we're past that, really early adopter stage and really getting into being real confident that we can solve a lot of problems for folks and get it deployed well. And with that, I want to mention, go ahead and throw any questions you have in the chat on the way through. We will have like a little bit of a delay due to the stream. So if you can go ahead and put whatever questions you have and stuff in the chat on the way through, then we'll check those and we'll answer them as we get to them. But besides that, Josh, go ahead, dive in.
That's great. Yeah, let's get into it. So I'll bring up the Pod2 planner here and just expand it out a bit. So what you see on screen now, so this is the Pod2 planner. And the first view you see when you open up a plan is this schedule view. And so the idea is that this is where you do 90% of your work. So this is where you can run your weekly drilling meetings. This is where you can create long-term forecasts. You can do it all from this screen. And it's driven by a set of assumptions that you have. But once you have it set up, then you're really interacting with the schedule view. And so this is like a typical Gantt chart or any kind of like timeline view that you might have seen before. So across the top, you have a date. You can zoom in and zoom out and that kind of thing. On the left, we have resources at the top here. So these are anything that you want to represent on this schedule view. So it could be things like construction crews, top hole rigs, drilling rigs, frac crews, basically anything that you'd like to be able to visualize on this schedule view. And of course, you can hide any of these, so you can still have top hole rigs, but exclude them from this view if you just want to bake in their timing. So this is really flexible to allow whatever level of modeling that you're interested in. If I zoom in a little bit more, I can actually see all the individual activities that are happening on any one of these resources. So this is a drilling rig, and I can see this entire pad, every well that's scheduled on that pad, and you can see these lines drawn between them too. And so that's allowing me to see, my overall cycle time in this case, but also the different stages that each well is going through. So I'm going through site prep, top hole, drilling, and frac. So you can easily click on any of these wells to trace exactly what's happening to them. And you can see things like their start date, duration here really easily. And so what we did in the last live demo is showed a lot of the scheduling functionality. And so that was kind of table stakes for us. We wanted to make sure the scheduling workflows were really, really strong in this, because they're kind of the foundation of any planning workflows at an operator. And so, for example, one of the most common things you do is you have default durations for everything. So, this well, we expected it to take 11 days for drilling. And then as you get near to the actual drilling date, you might realize that actually this drilling duration should be shorter or it should be longer. And so we made it really easy to tweak the durations right in the screen. So if I change this from 11 days to 20 days, it actually repositioned the well based on that information. And you can see it's totally changed my schedule around that fact, trying to accommodate the fact that this duration is going to be longer. So maybe I needed to shift some other pads out in time, or move some pads to another rig line to accommodate that. And so the idea is that you set up whatever rules and assumptions that you would normally handle, and then you layer on things as you actually know them, or you have a better estimate of what they'll end up being. So you can change the duration easily, and you can see that it moved everything around it to accommodate it. And then the other part is you can change the start date too. So you can either type a date in here, or you can just drag and drop things. So as I drag and drop it out in time, maybe I know that it actually has to happen out here in January 2025. And I can just drag it into place. And you can see that as I do that, it's figuring out, well, this is creating a gap on this drilling rig. And so normally you don't want gaps on your drilling rigs. Maybe you do. Depends what you're doing. But generally, you don't want to have these gaps show up. So what it's trying to do is figure out, what can I move ahead on my schedule now that I've positioned this out in time? So it's constantly trying to figure out, how can I accelerate other things to maximize my resource utilization based on all of the other constraints in here, all the ranking or prioritization that you have layered in. How can I make sure that the schedule represents something that's actually realistic and something you might do by hand if you had infinite time and you were just creating iterations over and over again. And so we've tried to make this as intuitive as possible, and I think that'll show during this demo. Something else you might have noticed is on the bottom here, if I zoom out especially, I'll switch to group view. So like I said, I'm looking at the individual well activities right now. If I switch to group view using a hotkey, I'm looking at this entire pad now. And so as I move the entire pad around, I can see the exact impact that it's having on my CapEx and production and revenue. And so it's doing that live. Even before I let go of the mouse, it's going and recalculating all of my CapEx and production and revenue and telling me what it's going to end up being based on the fact that this pad is shifted. And that applies even if you switch rig lines. So you can just drag and drop it into place, and it'll figure out how did that change affect all of my economics and production. There's also another mode. So this is really shifting it into place. But you can see it's creating these gaps. And that's useful if you know that this has to start on an exact date. So you're kind of pinning it in time or fixing it in time. We have another mode called planning mode, which I mentioned at the very beginning. And this is one of the big new features we've added since the last demo. And so in planning mode, this is more about reprioritizing things. And so say if you're doing a longer term plan or long range plan, and you want to say, I would just want to rearrange some of these pads, you can just drag and drop them, and you can see it's almost snapping them into place. So it's not hard coding a date or anything. It's saying, I know the priority that I want on this rig line, or the order of the pads that I want. So you can just move them into place. You can move them between rig lines, and you're still seeing that live impact on your CapEx. And so some people use this, as they're trying to stay under a certain budget for the year. It's really useful. Or if you have certain production targets, it's really easy to move things into place to see how it's affecting everything. All right, so some of the changes since the last release. So the export options, this didn't really exist in the last demo. So we had some export functionality. It was fairly limited. You can see this list is pretty big now. So we still support Aries exports. We have Excel exports for basically everything. So, a lot of people rely on this to be able to quickly export things like schedule timing. And it just opens up in Excel. Sorry, it's on my other monitor. There you go. So this is quickly giving you a view that you can bring into your favorite BI tools, or if you have other software, for example, if you wanted to bring it back into something else that we don't have a native integration for yet, then this gives you an easy way to bring those dates and durations over. We have things like production curtailment exports. And so this is part of the functionality we've added around limits and offset activity interference. And so I'll get more into those, but this gives you a really quick overview of exactly which wells were impacted by those kinds of curtailment. So those are the Excel exports, same kind of thing for all of the other metrics here. And then we have export to Parquet. So this is a newer export that we've added. And so what that gives you is a similar kind of view, but it actually exports to these Parquet files. And so when you open one of these, it looks basically the same as that Excel export I was showing, but it's in a table format. So this works really well with your favorite BI tools. And so Power BI has an option built in to bring in Parquet files or link to them. Same with Spotfire and all the others. And so there's lots of different ways to get detail back out of the schedule or the plan after you're happy with the results. So all of the rules here and everything, they're all based on this assumptions tab. So if I jump over to assumptions, in here, there's all kinds of different things. So you have your resources, which, like I mentioned, it's flexible, so you can handle whatever kind of resources you'd like to see visually on your schedule. And for each one of these, you have things like mob times, when they're available. You can really easily add and drop rigs just by copying resources and changing their timing. We have your asset templates. And so this is basically the sequence of activities that every well is going through. And so depending on the type of planning you're doing, if you're planning at a high level, you might only have 3 activities like site prep and drilling and frac. But you can also get it into whatever detail you want. So you can have 15 activities here if you want, with complex relationships between all of them. It doesn't have to be like a linear sequence either. You can build this really complicated tree or graph of activities if you want. But this is basically saying, what activities would you like to be able to represent for every well? And so you can see I have drilling split into top hole and drilling here. And then on drilling, I have as the duration, a default, it uses that new lookup table functionality that I mentioned. So it's saying, based on the well type, go to that lookup table and grab a default duration. And so it's looking in this table and saying, well, based on the field name, pick out the duration column. Same thing for frac. So this is another example of a calculated duration. So you can see the new formula editor in here too. So this one's actually scaling it based on lateral length. So this is flexible enough to support whatever kind of formula you might want to put in here. So, some people base it on number of stages and different things like that. Our idea was really to be able to handle whatever information you want to layer in for your default durations. And like I mentioned, you can go in and per well, you can override any of this stuff. So even though this is the default, you can, as you know more information about how long a well is going to take, you can just go in and override it on that schedule view, and it'll use that.
Hey, Josh, we got a question from Lucas at Petronas Canada about constraints. Being able to limit production from a couple pads going to a common point. You want to go ahead and jump to that real quick?
Sure thing. So down here, also under the assumptions tab, so we have production limits. And so you can have as many of these as you want. So in this example, I have some compressor stations modeled. And so I'm basically saying any wells with a compressor station of these values. And so you can add whatever ones you want here. So if I wanted to add a panhandle, I can just select it. And then any wells matching that attribute, any of those attributes, will be applying this gas limit. So you can do gas limits, you can do oil or water, and you can vary them over time too. So if you have facility expansions planned, if it's a takeaway capacity, you can change it over time as you have real changes and based on whatever dates and so when it hits this limit, then it'll start curtailing. Based on whatever prioritization you have, it'll start curtailing wells. And so if it needs to shut in wells to stay under that limit, then it will. And so, like I mentioned, you can add as many of these as you want. So you could do one per compressor station or one per a takeaway point, or whatever level makes sense to you, depending on where you're operating. Where all this curtailment shows up is back on that schedule view. So all of the metrics here. So for oil production, I can switch between potential and curtailed. So if I switch to curtailed, my limits are pretty high in this case. So you won't see much of a shift. You can, if you're looking really closely, you can see it. So I can switch between those easily. So I can see the impact of those limits on my plan, and all the way down to revenue live. And if I just want to get, a list of which wells were affected by it, I can always use that production curtailment export that I mentioned. So when I bring that one up, I see exactly which wells were affected by it, and when they were impacted through time. And so you could do it at a compressor station level, like I mentioned, or any facility, or at the pad level. It's really up to you what level would make sense.
Yeah. And then one other one, kind of related about APIs on the way out. So Patrick asked, do we have APIs to consume the output of the planner and the ability to save different scenarios? So different scenarios, we've got some really, really good designs for like scenario management and keeping pieces linked and all kinds of good stuff there that we're going to dive into next year. But the way that works right now, you make another copy of this file, push the exports to whatever the BI tool is that you're doing your comparisons and analysis. But then, create however many files you need.
Yeah. And on APIs, so our preference so far has been to add, as customers need them, we'll just build out integrations built into the planner so that people don't have to write their own code. If they do prefer to do that, we do have some pretty flexible options here. So like the Parquet integration I mentioned earlier, you can export this out to a folder locally, or like a shared network drive, or you can export it to Azure Blob storage. And so once you're happy with an iteration, you can publish it, and then you can pick up those results, and whatever kind of pipeline that you want to have in place to use those results, you can easily consume them without having to target an API directly. And you can use partitions in Parquet as well, so you can automate all the scenario creation for you if you'd like. So you can use scenario names here. And when you export those, it's really simple. It takes a second, and you end up with something like this. So at that point, you're ready to bring it into your BI tools for comparisons, or move into other software. How it actually looks on things like Power BI. Let me bring up an example here. So if you're using Power BI, for example, or Spotfire, it's really easy to load those Parquet files. So if you want to do scenario comparisons, you can load them into all of your existing dashboards really easily. I'll just wait for Power BI to load there. And so what that actually looks like is those Parquet files are written into a folder somewhere, and they're automatically picked up. And so this is an example of a dashboard you might use for scenario comparisons. But we would basically help you set up whatever you need in order to be able to view those results and do comparisons. So, if I want to see production and CapEx, well counts compared by scenario, it's really easy to do that. So our focus so far has been on enabling people to easily get their own results back out of the planner and visualize them and compare them however they would like. Like Matt mentioned, next year we have some pretty big ideas of how we'd like to support that directly in the planner. But right now we've just made everything open, so you can use. It's easy to get your own data out because it's your data, and we're never going to be the blocker for integration. So if you wanted to export it somewhere else other than the built-in ones, we would be happy to add that for you. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions right now, so I'll keep going.
Sorry, there was one other that came from YouTube asking about the lookup tables for durations and the functions, but I know you're probably about to get there. Anyway, so.
Oh, yeah. So this is an example of being able to. So this drilling duration, we're using a lookup table for it, and you can combine these together. So you could say look up the duration by well type, and then apply a scaling factor based on the depth of the well or different kinds of things. So it's pretty flexible, and that's to handle whatever kind of defaults you'd want. And because this is a lookup table example, maybe now would be a good time to talk about the lookup tables a little bit more. If you've used lookup tables in Excel, like a VLOOKUP, or if you've used lookup lines in Aries or anything like that, the idea here is really similar. So you can look up by whatever attributes you want. In this case, it's field name. And then you have as many columns as you want. So we have just the duration and frac costs in here. But you could do text as one of the columns if you want to look up something and return text. Or you can have 15 columns here if you wanted to keep things together in one place based on well type. We also have the ability to interpolate between lookup values. So, if for people that have used Aries, you might be familiar with the concept. But in this case, we're looking up by a basin and then interpolating based on lateral length. So we'll actually interpolate the scaling factor in this case based on the lateral length of the well. So if it's 6,000, then we'll actually find what that ends up being between those two values. So again, making it really easy to set this up. And if you look at that lookup formula, this is actually simpler than the Excel version where you do VLOOKUP and exact matches and everything. So we spent a lot of time trying to make this as easy as possible so this isn't confusing. Okay, so I was talking about the asset templates. And so in here, so that was durations. And then, like I mentioned, we have relationships between the activities. And so you can form whatever sequence or structure that makes sense. You can also do delays between them built in. You could do fixed delays or calculated delays if you want it to be variable or vary based on some kind of attribute or something. You can choose the timing preference. So, for construction, you might just want it to happen as late as possible, but no later than absolutely needed in order to, we don't want construction to block drilling. We just want it to happen as late as possible. So you can do that kind of thing in here too. And permitting might be another example where you might want to use as late as possible here. We have groups, so you can do things by pad or whatever attribute you want. And so for some operators, they just want to drill an entire section or area at a time, or some people would want to have their, especially fracs, prioritized that way. So they might have some kind of like frac group or frac area. So you can group by whatever makes sense per activity in here. So you could drill by pad and then frac based on a larger frac area. So you don't have to come back later and frac them and shut in some of the existing wells. So this is meant to be flexible to support all kinds of different situations. You can also do things like have a group duration that's spread across all the wells on the pad. And we have prioritization in here too. And of course, every activity, you need to say what resources are required for it. And so in this case, this is a drilling activity. So of course I need a drilling rig, but the rules here are flexible too. So you could say, I want to use the same drilling rig that I used for top hole. It really depends on exactly what you're trying to represent. So that's our asset templates. And then after a well goes through these activities, we also need to know when do you want production to start. So you choose which activity represents the starting point for first production. And that's how we know where to place your production in time. And then based on the type well profile that you're using, it'll allocate it down to the day correctly. So, it's shifting the profile in time right to the exact day that it's supposed to come online. And then you get the monthly results correct down to the day. Okay, so that's asset templates. Also under the assumptions, this is where we have things like CapEx models. So I mentioned in the last live demo, we didn't have CapEx at all. So this is a new since the last demo. And so this allows you to easily say all of the relevant CapEx for a well. And so you can link this to your schedule. So you're basically saying whether you want like the site prep CapEx to be spread across the activity, or you can do offsets. So you could say, 30 days before site prep, I'd actually like the CapEx to hit. So it really depends on how you expect the spend profile for each one of these. And then on the cost side, you can do fixed amounts. So I just have 200 here, or you can do calculated amounts. And so you can see this one's doing a lookup table like we were showing earlier for duration, but just looking at frac costs instead of duration. So again, really simple to set up. I should mention that we generally help people set up their first plan, but the onboarding is super quick because we've tried to make everything like this really intuitive. So generally it clicks with people because this is what they work with their regular workflows. And so our philosophy around the planner has just been to try to match their workflow as it is and not try to make them learn, go through really big training courses and everything, or these really detailed manuals in order to pick up some of these concepts, because this is natural to people and this is how they think about it intuitively. So also under assumptions, so we talked about lookup tables. So we also have price sets. So like I mentioned, revenue is new in here. So this one's really simple. So you say any changes in the price that you're interested in. So you can have as many rows here as you want, or if you just want to have a simple high level assumption, like in this case with a flat price, you can do that. And you can import these too, if that will be easier, especially if you have a lot of rows. Type well profiles are in here too. So I just have 2 in this case. You can import these in bulk. And so if you have 100 type well profiles, you can easily bring those in from Excel. These are really simple right now. So you just do monthly rates. So this is your time normalized type well profile. So month 1, 2, 3 for average months. And then you can see that any of the products in that profile. So you can add in water or any other products that you're interested in here. And so how this is actually used on each well. So we'll jump over to the inventory now. And so this is giving me like a per well view of everything that I'm using. So down here, I have this production section. So I'm saying I want to use type well profile 2, and it's using a scheduled date, or I could say a specific date if I want to override it. And you can optionally have a scaling factor. So a lot of people will start with the type well profile and then scale it up or down based on different attributes. And so you can do all of that in here too. And then we also talked about production limits. And so one thing I did mention is you can easily toggle these on and off if you want to do sensitivities to certain limits. And again, it's all live. So as soon as you jump back to the schedule view, after you disable it, you can see exactly what the impact is on that curtail production. So under actions, we also have, this is where we've put time ops restrictions and offset activity interference. We do have some plans to probably reorganize this section in the future. This is where it is for now. We'll see where it goes. Under here though, so if you click on time ops restrictions, you can see an example of how we've set up a restriction based on when we're fracking activities, we want to make sure that we don't allow drilling or frack nearby. And so you can do that based on some different distance conditions. So you can say, I want to draw a box around the wellbore. So you can choose which section too. So you could draw a box just around the lateral, or you could draw a capsule shape with like a constant radius around it. And you set the length. and ends that you want to test. So you can offset like a negative offset here if you don't want to worry about the heel and toe interactions. But this is meant to be flexible so that you can add whatever conditions make sense to you. And so, you could have SIMOPS restrictions that only apply if they have the same formation or certain other attributes, or they seem likely to communicate. So there's all kinds of different options here, meant to be comprehensive enough to handle whatever kind of situation you'd like to model in here, rather than doing it by hand and then having to hard code dates around that. Similar functionality is the offset activity interference or frac interference modeling. So you can see the UI is almost the exact same. So same kind of distance conditions. So you're saying, I want to draw a box around every frac that's happening. And what this one allows you to do is, rather than schedule around it, it's just shutting in all wells within that radius. And so you can easily handle your PDP production this way. So if you have all your base well production in per well, you can see the exact impact on your base wells. So as you're going back and fracking wells, you can see how it's affecting all your PDP production. And that will all show up in that production curtailment export I mentioned. I think we have another question in there. Yeah, so the curtailed production, so the question was about what this 2 represents. So this is for the entire group. So we're applying this across this entire, all wells that match any of these attributes. So like in this one, for example, this one's a lot higher. So you can see that this one's across this entire panhandle compressor station. So any wells with either of these attributes in total can't exceed this limit. And if they do, then we'll automatically curtail those wells. And so since we were just talking about distance, in the inventory, we've added this section for all of your coordinates. So you have your surface, heel, and toe locations, and you can also see them on this map view. This is probably a bad example. Okay, you can see the rest of the map there. I was zoomed in too far. So obviously we need these coordinates in order to be able to do that kind of SIMOPS or activity interference modeling. And so we use the coordinates in order to draw those boxes around them. In the future, we're really interested in doing more with this mapping interface to be able to visualize more of the details. So as we're shutting in wells nearby, then being able to represent it on the map view. Right now, this is a really easy way to just QC the coordinates and make sure that they make sense for the area that you're in. And since we're on the inventory, this is also where you see your attributes. So all of the attributes in here are whatever you would like them to be. And so, if you're working with areas a lot or combo curve, then you might want to just use the same attribute list between your economics tool and the planner. But it's up to you. So you can add more details in here, but you can add things like text for tracking or grouping. You can use these all over the place, or you can add numbers, which, like I mentioned, are useful for just using as defaults for costs or durations, or you can use them for lookups or scaling factors. And then you can also add dates. So if you have permitting dates or anything else that you would like to be able to see in the planner, especially visualizing on that schedule view, then you can add all of that in here too. Also under the inventory, we have things like the schedule. So this is what the dates and durations and resources ended up being. This is also where you pick which asset template you're using. A lot of companies just have one. Some have more if they're trying to represent development wells and workovers and other things in the same plan. So you can set the template here. You choose which CapEx model you're using. And like I was showing, we just had one CapEx model in here, but this gives you an easy way to see exactly what that CapEx ends up looking like after we apply it per well. And so you get the breakdown of each one of those CapEx categories that you're interested in. We talked about the production section. We also have ownership in here. And so, whether it's Canada or the US, we'll show the relevant ownership. These can also, like a lot of the other inputs in here, you can do fixed or calculated. So this could be like a lookup table based on average interest in the area, if it's a new area, or if you have the actual ownership percentages, you can add them in here. So we also have shrinkage in here, heating value, and which price that we're using. And so this one's just using the default price set and heating value. So a lot of the same things anybody using economics tools are probably familiar with. So this is really meant to get you to the point where you can see some of those metrics live. So I want to use all of those things together. So my CapEx and production and revenue, so I can visualize it live at the bottom of this as I'm making actual planning decisions. So as I'm moving things around, it's using all of that information to do this live. And we're doing it in milliseconds. So it's really been a big deal to companies that have historically not had a way to do this. So they would, a simple change, just like switching these two pads. At some operators, that's a process that takes hours or possibly days in the worst case. So we've been really focused on speed and performance here to make sure that you can do all your iterations directly in the planner, understand and identify a few scenarios that are really important to you, and then export those results to be able to work with them.
Yeah, and that's what's been cool to see is I think, maybe the number of scenarios that you package up and put in a PowerPoint to share with management and stuff still might be 3 or 5 or whatever, but the number of iterations and what ifs and tests and things that you can do, it just goes way up when it is instant, as opposed to taking 5 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And the other piece that Grayson Mill pointed out to us that was kind of cool was the ability to disqualify options live. So like you're in a meeting, somebody says, hey, what if we move that pad forward? Or somebody has their favorite whatever. And then you can show that and say, hey, that's actually stupid. And so we shouldn't do that, and just like move on and get alignment and get buy-in on, hey, we do have the best possible plan. It's been pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And everything we've been focused on is, how do I make sure that this entire process is fast enough that I can really do those things? Because, if it takes you an hour to make a simple change like this, there's just a huge amount of scenarios that you'll never be able to run. And so, how much value are you missing out on by not being able to do something like this?
Yeah, and the need for this stuff is only getting more and more, because like water disposal issues, water management, like commodity prices, all of these things, like it's not going to get easier, and like it's not going to, like the number of scenarios and the amount of optimization that you need to do is not going to get less anytime soon. So I think this, while we don't like to focus too much on speeds and features and stuff, I think it really does have a big impact.
So now might be a good time to talk about some of the integrations. So I mentioned the Parquet integration that we've added. You can see there's other integrations here too. So one we just added in the last release is a Snowflake integration. And so what this allows you to do is actually link to a Snowflake table somewhere. So if you already have your inventory in Snowflake, then you can link to it and actually directly import your inventory from Snowflake. And so that includes things like which CapEx model do you want to use per well if you want to source it from Snowflake, which template is it using, scaling factors for your production, basically anything that you can import from Excel, you can also do from Snowflake. That applies to some of the other integrations here too. So Aries integration, I have this one set up. And so you can choose for every column in your master table, whether you want to map it to something on the planner side, So sometimes you might not want to have all of the same detail. And so we'll map everything by default, and then you can remove anything that you don't want. And so you can see I'm bringing a reserve category and a bunch of other attributes across from Aries. And so the idea is whenever I hit import, it'll resync it with my Aries database, whether that's Access or SQL Server. It'll load it directly into the plan. And the Aries integration is bidirectional, so you can also export. So a lot of people will just like to build an inventory directly based on their Aries project, layer on timing based on, I want to run 2 or 3 drilling rigs. Here are some better assumptions. Lay out the schedule for me, and then they'll export that timing back to Aries. And so immediately you can get all those dates back so that your economic lines can reference them. So your CapEx has the right timing. Your first production has the right timing, rather than just having, like the typical way where you just have an average drill days in Aries and just lay everything automatically. This allows you to get into a much more realistic schedule. Similar to that is the combo curve integration. So same kind of thing. So you use your API credentials from combo curve, set up the same kinds of mappings, and then it allows you to bring in your inventory from combo curve, and then also write the timing back really easily. So we've been really focused on fitting into people's existing workflows. So whatever tools you're working with, we want to make it easy to push and pull between those tools. And like I mentioned earlier, we never want to be the blocker on these integrations. So if you need your results or you want to source inputs from somewhere else, we're happy to support it directly in the planner for you. And so those are the main integrations that we have now. And like I mentioned, like the Parquet integration in particular is really useful if you want to build dashboards, or if you want to send your results to Azure or somewhere else to tie into bigger workflows that will then consume those results and do other things with them. Do we have any other questions at this point?
Nope, not yet.
Okay.
I think, we've got just a couple more minutes. So if anybody has any other questions or feedback, also, love to hear what you think, what else you'd like to see, that kind of stuff. Because the way, I think we talked about it a little bit, but the way that we build this thing is based on feedback from operators and what you guys need. And so that's how we prioritize everything. I guess one thing that I'll mention is that we do have a couple of videos of interviews that we've done with customers out there. They're on our YouTube. I think I posted them a couple of times on LinkedIn. I'll put them in the chat here eventually. Yeah, they're on the planner webpage also. So Evan from Grayson Mill and then Lisa from Birchcliff both recorded some feedback sessions and let us share them. So they're not full on testimonials, but obviously they do like us, or they wouldn't do that. But one of the things that Lisa talked about was how fast it was to get set up. And so we put our money where our mouth is on implementation, so we don't charge for them. Unless you need our consulting services around process design and change management and stuff like that. Everything to get set up with the software is included in the license fee. And I think Lisa even said she blocked off 2 weeks to get her model set up, and it was done in an hour and a half or 2 hours, an afternoon. It was pretty crazy. That won't happen every time. Their data was organized and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just really proud that with all the stuff that we've included and added, we've kept it easy enough to use to where implementation's still not hard. Josh, anything else you want to show?
A lot of the the main workflows and functionality that we've added. Obviously, there's a ton more, as you probably saw while I was skimming through all those release notes. And with 27 releases later, that's generally what tends to happen. There's all kinds of other stuff in here that we won't cover in this, but help you use this schedule view effectively.
Yeah.
So we're still actively adding all kinds of new functionality with every release. We have one coming up pretty soon that'll add in OpEx too. So we'll kind of have most of what you need for full before tax cash at that point. So we're really trying to support all of the planning workflows so that you don't need to do your schedule in here and then run anywhere else. You can do all of your analysis in here and easily compare scenarios directly in the planner. That's where you want to get to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think we can probably wrap up. Really appreciate everybody showing up. Al also appreciates you showing up, so he doesn't show up too well. If you need anything, we're pretty open book, so reach out. We've got links on the site to book meetings with us. I've already gotten a couple of emails from folks that were on the call. Really appreciate everybody's support, whether it's just on LinkedIn or, if you've given us direct feedback and all that kind of stuff has been really great and helped us get to where we are. We're still, we're just getting warmed up. We've got a lot more plans. But Josh, anything you want to leave them with? As your internet cuts out.
Sorry, it's just cutting. Yeah, it's really windy here. I told Matt it was a real risk running here right now, but yeah. No, I think that's great. Obviously, reach out if you want any more information or if you want to go in detail about anything that we showed here. Like I mentioned, we don't have 10 hours to spend on going through every single change. So there's all kinds of details in here that I'm sure people are interested in. So we're happy to give detailed demos, or if anybody just wants to try it out and see how it would work in their own planning process. Like Matt mentioned, it's really easy to get up and running just to try it out and see what kind of difference it makes. So thanks all for coming. I think we can probably end it here.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, have a good day.